the truth.
First rule of Fight Club is...
What do you know? I'll be back.
Say hello to my little friend!
I just went every day and sat by his bedside, and they told me that he'd wake up the next day, and he didn't. Then he didn't wake up the next day, and he didn't. He was 5 days in intensive care while I held vigil over his bedside. It was a very difficult time. I don't like to even really go there.
Chrissy Kernan doesn't want to go back to that day in 2011 when her husband Sean overdosed on prescription drugs.
It was the most terrible and horrifying thing I've ever been through.
Did you want to die?
I just wanted to end at that second. I wanted to end, I wanted to stop.
Sean Kernan wanted it to end because the drugs he hoped would save him were killing him.
I couldn't stick on anyone, and I just wanted to end, so it did something that, thank God, it wasn't permanent.
22 United States veterans kill themselves every day. Sean was almost one of them. Like many vets, he was diagnosed with Posttraumatic Stress Disorder, also called PTS. For Sean, it was the U.S. Army, the jungles of Panama. He saw too much after the U.S. invasion, when riots, ambushes, and casualties were a regular occurrence.
And there's the sad times, losing friends and people who you served with, and you start to question everything.
Questions that lingered when he got home. Despite having a beautiful wife whom he loved very much, 4 kids, a lucrative career in banking, Sean's life was full of darkness. He was prescribed dozens of different medications to help his sleep, to decrease his anxiety, to try and curb his depression. But none made it better. Most made it worse.
You can imagine how awful this situation is for vets, how you've overcome the symptoms and how...
Dr. Sue Sisley, a psychiatrist, has been treating veterans with post-traumatic stress for decades.
Thank you. Welcome home.
There's this huge constellation of symptoms, everything from insomnia to anxiety to flashbacks, and each one of those target symptoms generally would receive another prescription. They end up getting stuck on 8, 10, or 12 different medications, and suddenly they're like zombies. There's just a few meds on the market that work, and even those are really inadequate.
But there is one medication that holds a lot of promise.
Marijuana is excellent for PTSD.
Rick Doblin is a researcher and also has a doctorate from Harvard. He's been trying to study marijuana for decades.
One of the surprising things about marijuana is that it suppresses dream recall. For people that are traumatized and have nightmares, the opportunity to have a good night's sleep without remembering their nightmares can be fundamentally transformative. Also, marijuana tends to focus people's attention on the here and now, and that's also really important for people that are carrying the trauma from the past into the present.
If all of that was true, it sounded like marijuana could be an ideal treatment for PTSD. Yet understandably, there are many skeptics. Dr. Sue Sisley was one of them.
I was really stunned when more and more patients were coming out of the shadows and disclosing to me that they were having some useful experiences with this marijuana plant.
When you use marijuana, what happens to the PTSD?
They relax me and they help with my muscle spasms and my pains, and they make me sleepy, so they help me when I'm getting closer to bedtime.
But Dr. Sue Sisley would need more than just stories. She needed scientific proof that marijuana eases PTSD. She wanted to study this plant like you would any other medication.
We had a duty as medical professionals to demand that this plant be allowed to go through the proper drug development process of the FDA.
So Dr. Sue Sisley, the skeptic, and Rick Doblin, the believer, joined forces and started their crusade in 2009.
That's what we're hearing from most of these vets. They really want 2 different kinds.
Their goal? To investigate this simple but profoundly important question. Could marijuana help save veterans like Sean Kernan?
The veterans are saying they want an activating strain for the morning and then they want a sedating strain at night.
Problem is, they first applied to the federal government for approval in 2010 and were rejected. Then again in 2012, but were delayed for years by government bureaucracy.
That was extremely demoralizing to me. It was just frustrating.
I can understand some concerns about inefficiency and some cumbersomeness. Our job
FDA Deputy Director Douglas Throckmorton.
For marijuana, 3 agencies are involved in making sure that you're available to get the marijuana and then able to conduct a trial.
He's talking about the Food and Drug Administration, the Drug Enforcement Administration, the National Institute on Drug Abuse. And if you're a privately funded cannabis study, like Sisley and Doblin's, you also have to get the approval of the United States Public Health Service. It's a lot of government red tape. And it's an issue that we reported on in our earlier documentaries. Weed. It was a Schedule I controlled substance. The government was saying it had no medicinal value.
We're being handcuffed by the government, preventing us from doing the right trials.
That's from Weed 2, Cannabis Madness. Rick Doblin believes the right people were watching, because just 4 days after that documentary aired,
I got this letter saying that they had approved the study. It was fantastic. I mean, I was elated.
How big a deal was that? Some have called it a watershed moment in marijuana research.
Yeah, I believe that. And not because of some reevaluation of the risks and benefits of marijuana. It was because of changes in public perception.
For years, decades really, there's been hardly any United States research into the benefits of medical marijuana. On the contrary, most of the research focused on the harmful effects of the plant. Now, nearly 5 decades after it was deemed illegal, we are seeing history unfolding. The beginnings of a marijuana revolution.
FDA's official position is we want that drug studied. We want marijuana studied to decide its safety, its efficacy, its reliability, and we want to have that done as quickly as we possibly can.
That's music to the ears of veterans like Sean Kernan, who had to be convinced that marijuana could be the right option for him.
I talked to some people who weren't the stereotypical, persons who smoked marijuana. They were highly successful, highly motivated people.
He was once suicidal, but Sean now has hope. Hope that comes from this plant and from that new study, which might prove its benefit once and for all. June 27, 2014, nearly 4 months after the revolutionary PTSD and marijuana study was approved.
HR notified me just a little before 5 o'clock on a Friday.
The University of Arizona has fired Dr. Sue Sisley.
I was stunned because they stripped me of all of my work.
Her work, studying medical marijuana.
It's so disheartening for all these veterans who've stood shoulder to shoulder with me.
Her termination became national news.
Veterans are demanding that Sue Sisley be allowed to continue her work.
First of its kind pot study has now hit a major snag. A snag because without a job, Sisley's historic study is without a home. Let me ask about what's going on right now. I spoke to her soon after her dismissal. What do you think's happening?
I think Arizona legislature is dominated by several very extreme thinkers who are opposed to this type of research. Even though this is an FDA-approved study, it's a randomized controlled trial, the most rigorous science we can conduct in the U.S.
I can say that the University of Arizona is not bound to political pressure either on research or any employee.
Chris Sigurdsson is the spokesman for the University of Arizona. He insists Dr. Sisley's termination had nothing to do with marijuana research.
What did you think when you heard that news?
Anger.
Sean Kernan is angry because he knows what's at stake. The lives of thousands of veterans every year.
How important are those scientific studies to you?
It makes me speechless, which is something that doesn't happen a lot, that as a society, as a university, as Arizona is, as a country that says we love our vets, we have 22 veterans killing themselves a day.
Sean is particularly certain marijuana could have saved some of those lives, because in some ways, it has already saved him. After his drug overdose in 2011, he turned to cannabis as his last resort. And now, he vaporizes with it every day.
That's it.
The symptoms of PTSD, the anger, the irritability, when you take this, how does it make you feel? How does it address those symptoms?
It allows your brain to get back into a more healthy, normal pattern of behavior versus just spiraling worse and worse out of control.
Here's how scientists think cannabis can work. People with PTSD have an imbalance in their brain. Too many receptors associated with intense emotions like fear and anxiety, and not enough of a chemical that binds to these anxiety receptors to keep them calm and in check. Marijuana is filled with a chemical that can bind to these receptors and help restore balance to the PTSD brain. A balance that is helping Sean Kernan turn his life around.
We really came to the conclusion that it was really the medicine for him.
It seems very effective.
It does seem very effective.
But for Sean, it's trial and error. How much to use, when to use, or even the best strains. And how will it affect him long term? That's why the studies are needed.
How much does it concern you that there's not a lot of science behind this, that it hasn't really been studied, at least not in this country?
If he wasn't doing this, the fear is he wouldn't be here. So if there are some side effects that we're going to have to deal with down the road that haven't been studied yet, I figure we'll take that when it comes, but for now the children and I have my husband and father with us.
I want to get two things. One is like when I had that morning anxiety that I can...
Sean is lucky. Cannabis is a legal treatment for PTSD in California.
I would recommend like a bubble push for you during the day so you can actually still do things and function.
And he has enough money to buy his marijuana. It's not covered by insurance. But so many other veterans simply don't have that option. And the Veterans Administration hospitals cannot prescribe medical marijuana because it is illegal, federally, a Schedule I controlled substance. None of that is likely to change until research like Cicely's proves that cannabis is an effective, tested, mainstream medication. So to help other veterans, Sean is out front.
The administrative appeal for Dr. Isley, and then a letter from a veteran.
Protesting and fighting to get the PTSD study back on track.
I am going to find a home for this work, whether it's at the U of A or not. I feel such a deep sense of obligation to these veterans and to making this research happen.
So Sue Sisley is about to take a big gamble.
This is amazing.
Here in Las Vegas, medical marijuana is still a gamble, but also a potential jackpot for Dr. Sue Sisley.
They've been courting us since the day my termination was announced. Sue Sisley.
The future of her study hinges on finding a research site, like the University of Nevada, Las Vegas.
Without having a specific office, you can't even get a DEA license. Without a DEA Schedule I license, I can't purchase NIDA study drug.
Las Vegas would be ideal. Progressive politics, a budding medical marijuana community, and lots of veterans. Veterans who are fighting a battle on the home front and losing. Sean Kernan knows their pain.
When you see these younger soldiers coming back now, how worried are you about them?
Heartbroken, really. The stories I've heard and the stories I've seen firsthand from the medication regimen these kids are being put on that's addicting them to opiates.
It's senseless, really, especially when you consider that a simple plant could save them, and a scientific study could prove it. So Sisley soldiers on, hoping the Vegas odds are with her. December 2014. Dr. Sue Sisley has arrived in the mile-high state of Colorado. The Board of Health is granting $9 million from a surplus tax collected on medical marijuana to now study its benefits. Sisley wants some of that money so she can set up her own research lab. Sean Kernan is here as well.
I'm a survivor of a lot of the issues you guys are dealing with medical marijuana.
He wants to convince the board that the PTSD and marijuana study should win.
I think it's going to hopefully show what many of us vets anecdotally are experiencing, which is a simple plant that's been around for eons is helping.
And just an hour and a half later, a vote.
All those in favor? Aye. Aye. The motion passes unanimously.
There are signs everywhere of a revolution gaining momentum. Mainstream medicine, serious academic scientists, previously so unwilling to dip a toe into the heavily stigmatized world of medical marijuana, are now diving in, head first.
All sorts of people came out of the woodwork to try to help us, including VA researchers who are experts with marijuana use by vets with PTSD, and also researchers funded by NIDA who are located at Johns Hopkins.
And now 1 year after the study was approved by the federal government, the plants are now fully grown, brimming with the chemicals that could hold so much promise. But one question still nags at Rick Doblin. Did it have to take so long? For decades, researchers have wanted to speed things up by getting a variety of marijuana strains from places other than the University of Mississippi, even taking the government to court. But every time, they lost. Now, in the midst of this revolution, even that may be changing. Director of NIDA, Nora Volkov.
We started that dialogue with the DEA. In order for us to advance the science, we're going to have to be able to provide very specific marijuana product.
This bill that we are introducing seeks to right decades of wrong.
March 2015. Democrats Cory Booker and Kirsten Gillibrand, along with Republican Rand Paul, have just proposed the most audacious marijuana legislation in our lifetime. If it passes, it would create a fundamental change in the way the United States views and treats marijuana.
Our drug laws in this country as a whole need a revolution of common sense and compassion.
For starters, it would do something scientists have been begging for: reschedule cannabis from Schedule 1 to a much less restrictive Schedule 2 controlled substance.
Once you make the class of drugs Schedule 2, you can then research it and find out what are the medical impacts and when can you use it, when does it make sense. So that is what's necessary here. It's so simple.
The bill would also mandate more farms to grow research-grade marijuana and allow greater access to it for those in need, including veterans who would, for the first time, be able to get a prescription for medicinal marijuana from the VA hospitals.
Let's stop the pot hypocrisy. We now have had 3 presidents that have admitted to smoking marijuana. People in public office all throughout the Senate have said, hey, I've smoked marijuana recreationally. How much of a hypocrite do you have to be to say that I broke American laws using pot as a recreational thing, and that I'm not going to support this idea that as a medicine for severely sick people, that they shouldn't be able to access this drug?
It's an important question, a question that I took
Thank you very much for
to the President of the United States.
There's a bill on the floor of the Senate now proposing that marijuana get rescheduled from Schedule 1 to Schedule 2, saying it has no medicinal benefit to possible medicinal benefit. Do you support that?
You know, I think I'd have to take a look at the details, but I'm on record as saying that not only do I think carefully prescribed medical use of marijuana may in fact be appropriate, and we should follow the science as opposed to ideology on this issue.
It has been that message all along, throughout our history. Ideology has trumped science often, too often. But every now and then a revolution takes hold and is guided by those unwilling to give up.
We got to keep the pressure on, because the only thing that's getting this thing moved forward is the pressure.
A revolution that has moved so far in nearly 3 years, when we first met young Charlotte and saw her life transformed by medical marijuana. A government who once fought, now supports. A farm once barren, now abundant. Studies once forbidden, now underway, trying to provide scientific proof that could change, and yes, even save lives, like it did for Sean Kernan and his family.
You think it helped save him?
I do.
You know, we've walked down those roads together, and it's been a process that has been by no means fun or painless, but we're here today, and that's kind of how we look at it, and we look at it from the perspective of helping others.
Helping others and changing the world. The marijuana revolution has only just begun.